remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong with the planet itself. I wasn't outside. There was no earthquake, no siren, no dramatic headline yet. I was sitting at my desk, half asleep, watching a live time feed to follow out of habit more than necessity. Atomic clocks, precision stuff, normally boring, normally steady. Except that morning, the numbers didn't line up. At first, I thought it was my connection. I refreshed. Same thing. The timestamp was ahead by a fraction so small, most people would laugh it off. A millisecond, less than the blink of an eye. But that wasn't possible. Not like this. Earth doesn't just do that. Within minutes, the forums lit up. Scientists, engineers, timekeepers, people who live and breathe precision were all saying the same thing in different words. The day was shorter, not by a second, not even close, but enough to be measurable, enough to be real. The planet had spun faster than it ever had since we started measuring. I felt a strange tightening in my chest, not panic, more like the feeling you get when an elevator stops too abruptly. Your body notices before your mind does. By midday, the confirmations started coming in officially. Observatories, space agencies, labs that don't speak unless they're sure. Earth had completed its rotation faster than any recorded day in human history. No one could explain why. That's the part that still gets me. We know what slows the planet down: tidal friction, the moon, shifting mass. We know how to predict tiny changes years in advance. But this wasn't predicted. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't supposed to happen yet. Some scientists pointed to the core. Others blamed melting ice, redistributing mass. A few whispered about interactions we barely understand between Earth and space itself. But every explanation ended the same way, with uncertainty. Meanwhile, the consequences were subtle and unsettling. Satellites had to correct their timing. GPS systems drifted just slightly. Financial systems flagged discrepancies measured in nanoseconds, the kind of errors that don't matter until suddenly they do. Nothing failed catastrophically, but everything felt brittle, like a system running closer to its limits than we realized. What scared me most wasn't the speed up. It was the silence afterward. No dramatic reversal, no immediate slowdown. Just the quiet understanding that the most familiar rhythm of our lives, the length of a day, was no longer as reliable as we believed. We didn't feel it in our bones. We didn't see it in the sky. But the planet beneath us had changed its pace. And if Earth can do that once, without warning, I keep thinking about that tiny fraction of a second we lost. Because we didn't lose it together. We didn't notice it. And we have no idea what happens if the next one is bigger. The next day is when it stopped feeling theoretical. I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Not messages, not calls, but alerts, system alerts. The kind most people never see unless something deep in the infrastructure hiccups. Time sync warnings, network drift notifications. Words that usually live in server rooms, not morning news. I hadn't even gotten out of bed yet, and my hands were already shaking. Overnight, scientists confirmed it wasn't a one-off glitch. The fast day wasn't alone. It had neighbors. Shorter rotations scattered through recent months, hiding in plain sight, dismissed at first as noise. Except now, lined up together, they formed a pattern no one wanted to name yet. I remember staring at the ceiling, feeling that quiet, crawling fear, the kind that doesn't scream, just settles in your chest and refuses to leave. By noon, Experts were careful with their words, very careful. Phrases like statistically significant and outside expected variance started appearing. Translated into normal language, it meant this: Earth was behaving differently now. Still no alarms, still no evacuation maps. Just that low, unsettling realization that the rules we trusted were bending. Someone asked during a live briefing whether this could affect humans directly. There was a pause. Then, not immediately. That word, immediately, hung in the air longer than it should have. Because even tiny changes ripple outward. A faster spin nudges atmospheric circulation. It tugs at ocean currents. It shifts stress along fault lines already holding on by a thread. You don't feel it all at once. You feel it later, all at once. That night, I stepped outside. The sky looked normal, stars steady, moon calm. The kind of night that has no right to feel threatening. And yet, standing there, I had this overwhelming sense that the ground beneath my feet was no longer the steady thing I'd trusted my whole life. Not shaking, not breaking, just hurrying. I kept thinking about how we measure time as if it's something external, something we observe. But time here, our time, is tied to the spin of this planet. If Earth changes its rhythm, even slightly, we don't just lose milliseconds, we lose certainty. And the worst part? The scientists were already quietly asking the next question. By the third day, the language changed. Not publicly. On the news, everything was still wrapped in calm tones and reassuring phrases. But inside the scientific channels, the briefings that weren't meant for headlines, the wording hardened. Less speculation, more probability, less comfort. I know because someone leaked a transcript. It started with a sentence that made my stomach drop. If the trend continues, we will need to redefine what a stable day means. Redefine a day. That's not a small statement. That's not a footnote in a journal. A day isn't just a unit of time. It's the baseline for everything we build. Sleep cycles, navigation, power grids, markets. Even our own biology is tuned to that slow, steady spin we've trusted since before we had language. And now that spin was misbehaving. The data showed it clearly. The planet wasn't just spinning faster once. It was doing it intermittently. Shorter days appearing without warning, then slipping back toward normal, like a heart skipping beats. Not enough for most people to feel, enough for machines to notice, enough for scientists to worry. I remember pacing my apartment while reading the report, barefoot on the floor, suddenly aware of the weight of the building, the city, the continent. All of it riding on this rotating sphere like passengers who never asked where the driver learned to steer. One paragraph focused on the core, not the surface, not the atmosphere, the core. They described subtle changes in how Earth's inner layers might be exchanging angular momentum. Words like decoupling and anisotropy appeared. Translation: parts of the planet may no longer be moving in perfect agreement. That's when the fear shifted. This wasn't about clocks anymore. It was about coordination. When a system as large as Earth loses synchronization, even slightly, stress builds in strange places. Not immediately, not cleanly. Stress waits. It migrates. It looks for weak points. Someone in the report asked whether this could influence seismic activity. The answer was careful, almost elegant. Correlation does not imply causation, but correlation deserves attention. That night, I barely slept, not because anything happened, but because nothing did. The world outside my window was normal in the most unsettling way. Traffic lights changed on time. Trains ran on schedule. People laughed on balconies. No one screamed. No one ran. And yet, somewhere deep below us, something ancient and massive was subtly changing its pace. I kept thinking about how we've always treated Earth like a reliable constant, a background, the stage beneath the play of human history. Wars, empires, inventions, all of it happened, assuming the stage wouldn't move. What if that assumption was wrong? Just before dawn, my phone buzzed again. Not an alert this time. A message. One line. No explanation. Another short day detected. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and for the first time, a thought surfaced that I couldn't push away. What if this wasn't a glitch? What if this was the beginning of a new rhythm, and we were the ones out of sync? The fourth day arrived quietly, and somehow that made it worse. No breaking news banners, no emergency tones on phones, just a subtle shift in the way experts spoke, like people lowering their voices in a room where something fragile might be sleeping or listening. I was already awake when the confirmation came in. Another shortened rotation, smaller than the last one, but unmistakable, measured independently by multiple observatories, verified by atomic clocks that don't care about opinions or optimism. Earth had done it again. I remember feeling a strange sense of vertigo, even though I was sitting perfectly still. Not dizziness exactly, more like the mental sensation of missing a step on a staircase you've climbed 1,000 times. Your body expects resistance. When it's not there, panic flickers before you even understand why. Scientists started using a phrase that morning that hadn't appeared before. Cumulative effect. Individually, the changes were tiny, fractions of milliseconds shaved off a day no human could consciously perceive. But stacked together, layered over months, they became something else, a trend, a drift, time slipping, just enough to matter. Behind closed doors, agencies began coordinating in ways they hadn't before. Not emergency coordination, preemptive coordination, the kind that happens when people don't yet know what they're dealing with, but they know they can't afford to be surprised twice. I followed one briefing where a researcher compared the planet to a spinning top. As long as it's stable, small nudges don't matter, she said. But when internal forces change, the wobble doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. Someone asked the obvious question, what happens if the wobble grows? There was another pause, longer this time. Then the system finds a new equilibrium. That word again, new. I didn't like it because equilibrium doesn't care whether the things living on the surface are comfortable with the adjustment. By afternoon, rumors started leaking, not the wild kind, but the dangerous kind. Half-truths, screenshots of internal memos without context, phrases like stress redistribution and rotational coupling anomalies floated across social feeds, stripped of nuance and amplified by fear. People began asking if this could affect weather. The answer was yes, but not today. Could it affect oceans? Eventually, maybe. Could it affect tectonic systems? No one wanted to answer that one directly. That evening, I went for a walk, needing to feel something solid under my feet. The city was alive in its usual way. Lights glowing, voices overlapping, cars flowing through intersections like blood through veins. Everything moving according to schedules, built on the assumption that tomorrow would be exactly 24 hours long. I stood at a crosswalk, and watched the signal change, thinking about how many invisible systems depended on that timing being right. How many layers of modern life were synchronized to a planetary heartbeat we'd never questioned. A shorter day doesn't mean the sun rises early or sets late in any noticeable way. Not yet. What it means is that everything happens just a little faster than expected. The margin for error shrinks. The buffer disappears. Late that night, a new theory began circulating among researchers. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve outside forces or cosmic interference. It was almost worse than that. The idea was simple. Earth may be responding to changes we already set in motion. Melting ice shifting mass toward the equator. Ocean circulation redistributing weight. The slow rebound of land once crushed by ancient ice sheets. Individually harmless, together capable of nudging a spinning planet, not breaking it, just urging it. I stared at that paragraph for a long time, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. Because this explanation didn't make Earth feel hostile or unpredictable. It made it feel responsive, like a system adjusting to pressure. Just before midnight, a senior researcher summarized it in a sentence I haven't been able to forget. We're not watching the planet fail. We're watching it adapt. Adapt. I lay in bed afterward, listening to the familiar sounds of night, distant traffic, a neighbor's footsteps, the soft hum of electricity in the walls, and tried to imagine Earth not as a static home, but as a moving machine with tolerances and limits. If this was adaptation, it meant the planet was changing its rhythm to accommodate new conditions. And that raised a question no one had answered yet. Adaptation for whom? Because history is full of systems that survived change just fine, while the things living inside them didn't. As sleep finally crept in, one thought followed me into the dark. If Earth was finding a new balance, we might not like where it settles. The fifth day was the first time fear reached the public, not panic. Fear is quieter than that. Panic runs. Fear listens. It started with the pilots. Aviation systems rely on time more than most people realize. Navigation, synchronization, collision avoidance, all of it stitched together by clocks so precise they correct themselves constantly. That morning, several long-haul flights reported timing discrepancies during routine checks. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that forced emergency landings. Just enough to trigger mandatory reports. Those reports leaked. By mid-morning, the phrase time drift was everywhere. I watched a press conference live, the kind where officials stand too straight and smile too carefully. A journalist asked whether these shorter days could affect transportation safety. The answer was technically reassuring and emotionally useless. Our systems are designed with redundancy. Redundancy means you expect failure. That's when I felt it, that thin crack opening beneath the calm. Online, people started doing what people always do when something abstract turns personal. They searched for patterns, sleep apps, fitness trackers, smartwatches. Anyone who could measure time, heart rate, circadian rhythm suddenly had data to compare. Most of it meant nothing. Some of it lined up a little too well. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was afraid of something happening, but because I was afraid of waiting for it. The uncertainty had teeth now. It wasn't about one day being shorter. It was about the realization that the planet's most basic rhythm was no longer guaranteed. Around 2 a.m., a document surfaced, not officially released, not meant for us. It was a provisional assessment from a joint scientific task group. written in language so careful it felt like walking across thin ice. Buried deep in the report was a sentence that changed how I read everything afterward. If acceleration events increase in frequency or magnitude, compensatory adjustments may no longer remain purely technical. Purely technical, meaning right now the fixes were software updates, leap-second debates, system recalibrations. But later might require something else. I imagined what it would mean to manually correct time again, to admit that Earth's rotation, once the definition of a day, had become unreliable, that we might need to impose our own artificial rhythm on top of a planet that no longer agreed with it. That thought scared me more than any disaster scenario, because it wasn't loud, it wasn't cinematic, it was administrative. Civilizations don't always collapse with noise. Sometimes they drift, quietly misaligned, until nothing quite works the way it used to. The next morning, scientists confirmed another data point. Not the fastest day, not even close, but different. This time, the spin didn't just speed up, it hesitated afterward, a tiny, measurable wobble. They called it a post-acceleration relaxation anomaly, a harmless phrase for something deeply unsettling. Earth was not just changing speed, it was adjusting dynamically, like a runner changing pace mid-stride. I went outside again that evening, the same way I had days earlier, same street, same buildings, same sky. Everything looked normal, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on something that no longer promised consistency. I pressed my palm against the wall of my building, feeling the vibration of life inside it. Pipes, electricity, people. All of it synced to a clock that assumed tomorrow would be the same length as today. What if that assumption had expired? That night, an expert I respect deeply said something during a private interview that never made it to the broadcast. He leaned forward, lowered his voice, and said, "Earth has done this before, just not while anyone was watching." That sentence followed me long after the screen went dark. Because if that was true, if the planet had shifted its rhythm countless times in deep history, then the difference now wasn't the event. It was us. We're the first species to build a world that depends on the planet behaving predictably down to fractions of a second. The first to tie finance, medicine, communication, and survival itself to a spin we assumed was steady. And now that spin was experimenting. As I finally lay down, exhaustion pulling at me, one last thought surfaced, heavy and unavoidable. Earth doesn't owe us stability. We just got used to it. And if the planet was reminding us of that fact, slowly, quietly, one shortened day at a time, then the real consequences hadn't started yet. They were just lining up. The sixth day is when certainty broke. Not in the labs. Those had been uneasy for a while, but in the language people used when they thought no one was recording. The careful optimism thinned. The pauses grew longer. Answers began to drift before landing. I knew something was different the moment I saw the notification. Not another short day. Something else. The rotation data showed a correction. Earth had slowed again, but not back to baseline. It overshot slightly, then settled, like a pendulum that had lost its perfect rhythm and was now searching for it in real time. That was new. I remember whispering, "That's not noise," to an empty room, because noise doesn't correct itself. That afternoon, a quiet advisory went out to industries that never make headlines unless something has already gone wrong. power grid operators, financial clearinghouses, satellite coordinators. The message wasn't alarming, but it was unmistakable. Prepare for increased temporal variability. Variability, not anomaly, not incident, a condition. I felt my throat tighten when I read that word. Conditions are things you adapt to. You don't wait them out. By evening, the first real-world consequence appeared, not dramatic, but symbolic. A high-frequency trading system paused itself automatically after detecting micro-desynchronizations it couldn't safely reconcile. No crash, no losses, just a stop, a machine choosing caution. That scared me more than any human reaction. Machines don't panic, they respond to thresholds. Later that night, a senior geophysicist spoke candidly during a closed session. Someone leaked the audio. His voice was tired, stripped of performance. "We assumed Earth's rotation was a metronome," he said. "It turns out it's a drummer, and drummers improvise." There was nervous laughter in the room, then silence. He went on to explain that Earth is not a rigid object. It's layered, fluid in places, elastic in others, core, mantle, oceans, atmosphere, all exchanging momentum constantly. We measure the average and call it stable, but stability is an illusion built on patience. "What worries me," he said, "isn't that it changed speed. It's that it did so selectively. Selectively, certain days, certain intervals, no obvious external trigger, no clear schedule." I replayed that word over and over in my head. That night, I dreamed the clocks in my apartment were breathing, expanding and contracting, not ticking forward so much as swaying. I woke up before dawn, heart racing, and checked the time instinctively, as if it might be different depending on where I looked. It wasn't. Not yet. But that sense of trust, that reflexive belief that time would always be there, steady and unquestionable, had cracked. By morning, social media had split into camps. Some dismissed the whole thing as overblown. Others leaned hard into fear, predicting everything from system collapse to biological disruption. Most people hovered somewhere in between, uneasy but unsure what to do with that feeling. That's the most dangerous place to sit, because when people don't know how to react, they wait for permission, and no one was giving it. The official update that afternoon tried to close the gap. "Yes, Earth's rotation has shown recent variability," the spokesperson said. "No, there is no immediate risk to human life." Immediate again. Someone asked, "How long immediate covered?" The answer came after a pause. "That depends on whether the system stabilizes." System. They weren't even pretending anymore. That evening, I stood by my window and watched the city lights come on one by one, perfectly timed, perfectly synchronized. Billions of actions happening on cue, all trusting a shared clock, rooted in a spinning planet that was quietly testing its limits. For the first time, I wondered what would happen if Earth didn't find its rhythm again. Not a catastrophe, not a collapse, just drift. A world where every correction comes a fraction too late, where every system runs just close enough to the edge that failure is always an option. As darkness settled, one final update slipped through the channels I monitor. A researcher had run a long-range model using the new data. The result wasn't conclusive, but it showed something no one wanted to say out loud. If the current pattern held, if acceleration and correction continued to alternate, Earth wasn't heading toward chaos. It was heading toward a new normal. And new normals don't ask permission. They arrive quietly, unstoppably. and only later do we realize we're already living inside them. The seventh day is when they stopped calling it a phenomenon. Internally, the word changed to behavior. That shift matters more than it sounds. Phenomena happen to systems. Behavior comes from them. One implies interruption. The other implies intent, not consciousness, but pattern. I saw it in a draft report that wasn't meant to leave a secure server. Someone had forgotten to strip the metadata. The title alone made my stomach turn. Observed rotational behavior under transitional conditions. Transitional. Between what and what? By then, the data stream was dense enough to tell a story, and stories are dangerous things when they start making sense. The shortened days weren't random anymore. They clustered. Accelerations followed by compensations. Small speed-ups paired with slightly longer slowdowns. Like the planet was testing ranges, probing limits, feeling out what it could get away with. One analyst compared it to tuning an engine. "You don't jump straight to red line," she said during a muted call. "You rev, you listen, you adjust." I muted the call myself after that. I didn't want to hear where that analogy could go. By afternoon, a decision was made that most people didn't notice but will probably matter in hindsight. Timekeeping authorities quietly agreed to delay any public discussion of leap-second adjustments. Not cancel, delay. They wanted more data before touching the clock. That alone told me everything, because leap seconds are how we've always reconciled Earth's imperfect rotation with atomic time. They're the admission that the planet isn't exact, but also the proof that we've always been able to catch up. Now, no one was sure catching up was the right move. If you correct too early and the planet keeps changing, you introduce more instability. If you wait too long, systems drift too far to recover cleanly. It's the kind of dilemma you face when you're no longer in control of the pace. That evening, I noticed something small and deeply unsettling. My own body felt off. Not sick, not tired, just slightly misaligned, like jet lag without travel. I brushed it off at first, but then I saw others mentioning the same thing. Headaches, restless sleep, a vague sense of unease they couldn't explain. Doctors said it was stress. They're probably right, but stress has a way of amplifying truths that are already there. Late that night, a respected chronobiologist broke protocol and spoke openly in a forum meant for peers, not the public. "Our circadian rhythms evolved with Earth," she wrote. "They're adaptable, but not infinitely so. If variability increases, the first impacts won't be dramatic. They'll be subtle. Sleep fragmentation, mood instability, cognitive fog." She ended her post with a sentence that sat heavy on my chest. "Biology prefers consistency over precision." I stared at that line for a long time. Consistency was exactly what we were losing. Just before midnight, the seventh day delivered its own quiet marker. Not the fastest, not the slowest, but something else entirely. For the first time, Earth's rotation deviated within a single day, accelerating slightly, then easing back before the cycle completed. A fluctuation inside the spin that wasn't supposed to happen. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with temperature, because this wasn't a daily issue anymore. It wasn't about days being shorter or longer. It was about the idea that a day itself might no longer be a uniform thing. I imagined future charts, future textbooks, explaining that this was the moment we stopped treating Earth as a clock and started treating it as a variable, a living system with thresholds. And then came the message that pushed everything over the edge for me. A single sentence from a researcher I trust more than most. We are now observing feedback. Feedback loops don't stop on their own. They stabilize, or they run. I went to bed knowing the 8th day wouldn't just add more data, it would force a choice. Because once a system shows feedback, pretending you're just an observer stops being an option. You're part of it now. And Earth had started to answer itself. The 8th day began with an argument, not between politicians, not on television. It happened quietly, inside a secure virtual room where people who rarely disagree openly were suddenly talking over one another. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but fragments leaked, as they always do when tension outruns protocol. The argument wasn't about whether Earth was changing anymore. It was about how much intervention was acceptable. That alone told me we'd crossed a line. One group insisted the planet should be observed, not corrected. Earth had always adjusted itself, they said. Our role was to understand, not interfere. Another group pushed back hard. Modern civilization, they argued, was built on temporal stability. Letting drift accumulate was not neutrality. It was negligence. I remember one line from the transcript that made my hands go cold. If we don't anchor time, the systems will fragment faster than the planet ever could. Anchor time. As if time itself were slipping loose. By mid-morning, a controlled experiment was authorized. Not public, not announced. A minor adjustment in a non-critical satellite network. Tiny compensations to counter expected drift during the next rotation cycle. The goal wasn't to change Earth, just to test how systems behaved when corrected aggressively instead of passively. It was supposed to be invisible. It wasn't. The results came back messy. Some systems stabilized beautifully. Others overshot, introducing oscillations that hadn't been there before. Fix one layer too hard, and another started to wobble. I felt an unexpected wave of dread reading that report. Because it mirrored the planet. Acceleration, correction, overshoot, relaxation. We weren't just observing feedback anymore. We were copying it. That afternoon, Earth delivered its own response. Another rotation anomaly, this one sharper, not the fastest on record, but abrupt enough that the curve on the graph looked wrong. Less smooth, more angular, as if something had pushed, then pulled back. The room went quiet. Someone finally said what had been hovering unspoken for days. This looks reactive, not conscious, not intentional, but responsive. A system responding to internal and external adjustments at the same time. By evening, public messaging shifted again, still calm, still measured, but now threaded with a subtle admission. Ongoing assessment, dynamic modeling, adaptive frameworks. No one said stable anymore. I went outside as the sun set, watching the sky darken at its usual pace, daring it to feel different. It didn't. And that was the cruel part. Nothing looked wrong. Nothing sounded wrong. The planet wasn't shaking us off or warning us with spectacle. It was changing politely, quietly. Late that night, a senior systems analyst, someone who normally speaks in equations, summed it up in plain language during a private call. We assumed Earth would stay the reference, he said. Now it's behaving like a participant. A participant. That word settled deep in my gut, because participants don't just follow rules, they interact. Just before I went to sleep, the 8th day ended slightly longer than predicted. Not enough to break records, but enough to confirm the trend. Acceleration answered by restraint. Motion answered by counter-motion. A conversation between layers of a planet we barely understand, between natural systems and the artificial scaffolding we've wrapped around them. Lying in the dark, I realized something that made my chest tighten. We'd been asking the wrong question all along. Not, why is Earth spinning faster? But what is Earth responding to? And once you ask that question, another follows close behind, heavy and unavoidable. What happens if the answer is us? Because feedback doesn't care about intent, only pressure. And pressure, once acknowledged, doesn't go away just because you stop looking at it. As sleep finally pulled me under, the thought that lingered was this: the planet had entered the conversation. And history suggests that when systems start talking back, they're already changing the rules. The 9th day didn't arrive on schedule. I don't mean the sun rose late or the clocks glitched. I mean the confirmation came late, hours later than expected, because no one could agree on what they were seeing. The rotation data was clean, too clean. Earth hadn't just sped up or slowed down this time. It had held a new rate for almost the entire cycle, deviating only at the edges. No jitter, no wobble, no overcorrection. A plateau. I remember leaning back in my chair, staring at the graph, feeling my pulse in my ears. This wasn't improvisation anymore. This was settling. Someone typed in the internal channel. This looks intentional. It was deleted within seconds. Another message followed, more careful. The system appears to be exploring a stable basin. That one stayed. By mid-morning, the mood had changed completely. Not fear, not relief, focus. When uncertainty turns into structure, people stop guessing and start planning. And planning is where consequences begin. A closed-door session was convened with a name so bland it almost felt cruel. Temporal continuity alignment. Alignment with what? That question hung over everything. The discussion wasn't about stopping Earth anymore. That idea had quietly died days earlier. You don't stop a planet, you adapt to it. The real debate was about who adapts first, nature or civilization. Option 1, let Earth lead, accept variable days, rewrite software, markets, medical protocols, biological research, teach future generations that a day is a range, not a number. Option 2, impose consistency, decouple human timekeeping entirely from Earth's rotation. Let atomic time rule and treat the planet as background noise. Neither option felt safe. Let Earth lead, and you invite drift into everything built on precision. Impose consistency, and you sever a relationship older than humanity itself. Our bodies, our sleep, our sense of morning and night, all tied to the sky. Someone asked the question everyone had been avoiding. What if we try to do both? The room went very still, because doing both means feedback on feedback, corrections correcting corrections, a loop with no clear owner. That afternoon, subtle reports started surfacing again. Emergency services noticing odd clustering of calls around sleep-related incidents. Hospitals seeing slight increases in disorientation, nothing alarming on its own. Insurance models flagging patterns they couldn't yet name. Small things. But systems rarely fail from big things first. Late in the day, Earth broke the plateau. Not dramatically, just enough. A gentle acceleration near the end of the rotation, followed by a smooth handoff into the next cycle. No overshoot, no recoil, clean, efficient. I felt something then that I hadn't felt before. Not fear, not awe, but a strange sense of being outpaced, like watching someone solve a problem faster than you realized they could. That night, a message circulated among a very small circle. No header, no branding, just text. If this stabilizes, we are no longer observing anomalies. We are witnessing a regime shift. Regime shift. In climate science, that phrase is used sparingly. It means a system has crossed a threshold and won't return to its old behavior, even if the original pressure disappears. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time after reading that. Because if Earth had crossed a threshold, then all our debates about intervention were already late. You don't vote on gravity after it starts pulling differently. You respond. Before bed, I checked the time one last time. Out of habit, more than need. Same numbers, same digits, same illusion of normalcy. But I couldn't shake the feeling that those numbers were now a translation. Our best guess at something that no longer spoke our language fluently. As I lay there, listening to the quiet rhythm of the building, I thought about how humans have always defined themselves by mastery over cycles, seasons, tides, time itself. We thought understanding meant control, but control only exists when the system agrees to be controlled. Earth had been patient with us for a very long time. Now, it was showing us something different. Not anger, not collapse, just autonomy. And as the 9th day slipped into the 10th, slightly faster than we expected, slightly smoother than before, I realized the most unsettling possibility of all. The planet wasn't breaking, it was learning. And whatever it learned next, we would have to live with. The 10th day began without surprise. That, more than anything else, terrified me. No alerts, no urgent messages, no last-minute corrections scrambling across internal channels. The data arrived on time, clean and orderly, as if the planet had finally decided on a pace and saw no reason to argue about it. Earth completed its rotation faster than the old standard, not by much, but consistently. I watched the numbers settle into place, and for the first time since this started, no one rushed to reinterpret them, no frantic recalculations, no speculative models layered on top of one another. The silence wasn't confusion, it was acceptance. Someone finally said it out loud during a closed session, their voice calm in a way that felt almost inappropriate. This may be the new baseline. Baseline. The word echoed in my head like a dropped tool in an empty room. A baseline is what you build on, what you stop questioning, what future assumptions quietly lean against without asking permission. And if this was the new one, then everything we'd constructed, technically, biologically, psychologically, was now just a little bit misaligned with reality. Not enough to break, enough to matter. By mid-morning, a quiet decision was made. No press release, no public vote, just a consensus among people who understood what delay would cost. Atomic time would remain untouched. Earth-based time would be monitored, documented, but no longer treated as the ultimate reference. A subtle divorce. We would keep watching the planet, but we would stop chasing it. That choice sent a strange chill through me. It felt practical, necessary, and deeply unnatural. For most of human history, the sky told us when to wake, when to sleep, when to plant, when to stop. Now we were choosing to let machines decide that instead, not because we wanted to, but because we were afraid of following something that might change again. That afternoon, I stepped outside and let the sun hit my face, trying to feel the day. It felt the same, warm, familiar. Birds moved when they always did. Shadows stretched at their usual angles. And yet, I knew, deep down, that this was a translated experience now. My sense of time wasn't wrong, but it was no longer authoritative. It was an interpretation layered over a planet that had quietly revised its own tempo. Later, I read a message from a researcher who had gone silent days earlier. When he finally spoke, it was with a kind of exhausted clarity. "We assumed stability was a property of Earth," he wrote. "It turns out stability was a phase. A phase. Temporary by definition." That night, the 10th day ended exactly as the new models predicted. No surprise acceleration, no corrective drag, just a smooth handoff into the next rotation, steady and unapologetic. Earth wasn't asking if we were comfortable. It was done experimenting. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something subtle but profound had shifted inside me. I no longer felt like a resident of a stable planet observing an anomaly. I felt like a passenger who had just noticed the engine's hum change and realized it wasn't going back. Tomorrow would still come. Morning would still arrive. But the promise beneath it, the quiet guarantee that the world would keep time the way it always had, was gone, replaced by something colder, more honest. Earth hadn't sped up to warn us. It hadn't slowed down to accommodate us. It had simply continued forward on its own terms. And that meant the rest of the story wouldn't be about seconds or milliseconds anymore. It would be about how long it takes a civilization to realize that the ground it stands on is not a clock, but a moving system. And systems don't wait. The 11th day was the first time I heard someone say the word irreversible without flinching. It came during a late briefing, the kind that happens after people stop pretending they're calm. No cameras, no statements written in advance, just tired faces and voices that had spent too many nights negotiating with uncertainty. One of the senior analysts cleared her throat before speaking. "We've run the backward models," she said. "Even if all known drivers were removed tomorrow, the system wouldn't return to the previous rotational regime." No one interrupted her, because everyone in that room understood what she meant. This wasn't a spike. It wasn't a temporary adjustment. It wasn't Earth clearing its throat. It was a shift. I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes. Not tears, not panic, but something closer to grief. You don't mourn destruction when nothing is broken. You mourn familiarity. You mourn the quiet assumptions you didn't realize you loved until they vanished. Later that morning, the public finally noticed something real. Not the rotation, not the clocks, not the graphs. Sleep. People were waking up tired in a way that didn't make sense. Not exhausted, misaligned, like they'd slept at the wrong angle. Dreams felt sharper. Nights felt shorter, even when they weren't. Doctors blamed anxiety. Employers blamed burnout. But the patterns didn't quite fit. Circadian researchers began speaking more openly, carefully threading their words to avoid alarm. They explained that human biology doesn't just respond to light and darkness. It responds to regularity, to repetition, to a rhythm that stays put long enough for cells to trust it. And trust, it turned out, was eroding. That afternoon, a memo circulated through international agencies with a title that would have sounded absurd just weeks earlier: Guidelines for Living with Variable Day Length. Not emergency measures, not temporary accommodations, living with it. The guidelines were mundane and unsettling at the same time. recommendations for flexible work cycles, adaptive lighting, gradual decoupling of biological scheduling from strict solar cues, suggestions, not mandates. Yet, I remember staring at the word gradual and wondering how many irreversible changes in history began exactly that way. By evening, Earth delivered another confirmation. The rotation matched the new baseline again, perfectly. No deviation worth mentioning. The data analysts didn't cheer. They nodded. Stability had returned, just not the kind we grew up with. That night, I walked farther than usual, letting the city blur around me. People were still laughing in restaurants, still arguing on sidewalks, still living inside stories that hadn't caught up to the graphs yet. And why would they? Nothing felt wrong. That's what made it dangerous. I stopped under a street light and looked up at the sky. The stars were where they belonged. The moon hung calmly, indifferent to our charts and debates. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd swear nothing had changed at all. But I knew. And so did a growing number of people whose job it was to notice when foundations shift quietly. Before midnight, a message arrived from a planetary scientist I've followed for years. She rarely speaks emotionally. This time, she didn't bother hiding it. "We keep asking how to fix this," she wrote. "But Earth isn't malfunctioning, it's transitioning. The problem is that our civilization was optimized for a version of the planet that no longer exists." I read that sentence 3 times. Optimized. That's the word that finally made it real. We didn't just live on Earth, we fine-tuned ourselves to it. Every schedule, every market, every medical dose, every flight window calibrated to a planet we assumed would stay put. Now, it wasn't. And adaptation, no matter how slow, always has a cost. As the 11th day drew to a close, slightly shorter than the one I grew up knowing, slightly smoother than any before it, I felt the weight of something settling over the world. Not fear, responsibility. Because once a change is irreversible, denial stops being ignorance. It becomes a choice. And tomorrow, more people would wake up feeling that subtle wrongness in their bones. Not enough to scream, not enough to run, but enough to wonder whether the day itself felt thinner. Earth wasn't warning us anymore. It was waiting to see whether we would keep pretending the clock mattered more than the system beneath it. And history suggests that when humans face a quiet, irreversible change, we rarely notice the moment adaptation becomes survival. The 12th day arrived with a kind of calm that felt rehearsed. The numbers came in early, clean, predictable. Earth rotated at the new rate again, as if daring us to stop calling it new and just accept it as truth. No one reacted with urgency anymore. The flurry of messages had slowed. The tone had flattened. This was normalization. I've always been more afraid of that than panic, because panic is loud and obvious. Normalization is what happens when something dangerous becomes familiar enough to ignore. By mid-morning, the first official language update appeared. Not a law, not a mandate, a recommendation. Governments and institutions were encouraged to avoid phrasing like standard day in official documentation. Instead, they suggested nominal day length. Nominal, approximate, good enough. I felt a strange tightening in my chest reading that. Words don't change reality, but they change how we prepare for it. And this was preparation, the quiet kind. Behind the scenes, system architects were already adjusting, databases decoupling assumptions, medical equipment recalibrating timing loops, power grids building wider tolerance windows, everything gaining flexibility. everything losing precision. Someone summarized it perfectly in a single message that never made the news. We are padding the world. That afternoon, a new report circulated, this one biological. Early data only, carefully hedged. But the implications were unsettling. Human sleep cycles were beginning to desynchronize slightly from solar cues in certain populations. Not insomnia, not disorder, drift. People weren't sleeping less. They were sleeping differently. Later, earlier, irregularly. The body adapting before the mind understood why. I thought about how many species had gone extinct, not because they couldn't survive a sudden catastrophe, but because they couldn't adapt quickly enough to a slow one. Change that creeps doesn't trigger alarms. It triggers fatigue. That evening, Earth did something subtle but historic. For the first time since this began, the rotation remained consistent, not just day to day, but across internal layers. Core mantle coupling stabilized. Atmospheric angular exchange smoothed. Oceanic feedback flattened. The planet wasn't adjusting anymore. It had arrived. A geophysicist described it during a muted call with a phrase that stuck with me. The system has settled into a lower energy configuration. Lower energy, efficient, stable, just different. I went outside again that night. Same habit, same sky, same quiet. I stood there longer than usual, trying to feel the day end. It still felt like evening. Darkness still came when I expected it. My body didn't revolt. My senses didn't scream. That was the most unsettling part of all. Earth didn't need our permission, and it didn't need our awareness. It could change everything important without changing anything obvious. Before bed, I scrolled through messages from people I trust, scientists, engineers, doctors. None of them were panicking. That scared me more than if they had been. One of them wrote, "This is survivable, but survivable doesn't mean unchanged." I turned off the light and lay there, listening to the soft, familiar sounds of night. Somewhere beneath me, thousands of kilometers down, the planet continued its new rhythm, steady, unbothered, resolved. And I realized something that made my stomach drop. We had crossed the point where asking, "Will it go back?" made sense. The better question now was, how much of us was built for a version of Earth that no longer exists? Because adaptation is never free. It costs comfort. It costs certainty. Sometimes it costs identity. The 12th day ended cleanly, smoothly, on time, according to the new definition of the word. And as sleep finally took me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part wasn't the planet changing. It was how quickly we were learning to live as if it always had. The 13th day was when the silence reached the streets. Not literal silence. Cars still passed, screens still glowed, but the conversations had changed. People stopped asking what was happening and started asking how long it would feel like this. That shift matters. It's the moment curiosity gives way to endurance. I noticed it in myself first. I checked the time less often, not because I trusted it more, but because I trusted it less. The habit felt pointless now, like asking a moving river for a fixed measurement. Morning arrived when it arrived. Night followed when it did. My body complied, a little reluctantly, but it complied. Adaptation doesn't announce itself, it sneaks in. By mid-morning, a global advisory was released, short, dry, intentionally boring. It confirmed what everyone already knew, but hadn't heard stated plainly. Earth's rotational rate is now considered conditionally stable within a revised range. Conditionally stable, but only if nothing else changes. That phrase lingered in my head like an unfinished sentence. In labs, the focus had shifted completely. No more crisis modeling, no more frantic what-ifs. Now it was optimization. How to live inside variability instead of fighting it. How to design systems that don't assume tomorrow will feel like today. One researcher said something during a recorded session that never went public. We spent centuries mastering control. Now the skill we need is tolerance. Tolerance for imprecision, tolerance for drift, tolerance for not being the reference point. That afternoon, the first long-term projections were quietly circulated. They weren't about days or seconds anymore. They were about generations. Children born into this rhythm would never feel the loss we did. Their bodies would sync to the new pace naturally. Their sense of normal would be cleaner than ours. That realization hurt more than I expected, because it meant this discomfort, this subtle wrongness, was temporary, but only for those who could outlive it. By evening, Earth delivered its most uneventful rotation yet. No spikes, no curves worth noting. The data line was almost perfectly flat, the kind of flat scientists dream about. And yet, I felt no relief. Flat doesn't mean fixed. It means balanced, for now. I stepped outside just before dusk and watched the light drain from the sky. Same colors, same fading warmth, but something in me resisted calling it evening. The word felt inherited, not earned, a label from an older version of the world. A neighbor passed by and said casually, "Feels like the day went fast." I nodded without correcting him, because he was right. Not technically, not measurably, but emotionally. Days were feeling thinner now, not shorter, thinner. Less space between moments, less margin for drifting thoughts. Time pressing closer to experience. Later that night, I read a message from an astronomer who had stopped contributing days ago. When she returned, it was with a single paragraph. "We've always looked outward for signs the universe doesn't care about us," she wrote. "But this is closer. This is the reminder that the ground itself has priorities we are not part of." I sat with that sentence for a long time. The 13th day ended without incident. No alerts, no headlines. Just another rotation at the new pace, delivered with quiet consistency. And I understood then why this was the most dangerous phase. Because when change becomes routine, resistance fades. You stop asking whether it's acceptable. You start asking how to live with it. Earth didn't need to push anymore. It had already taught us the lesson. We are not the clock. We are not the reference. We are not the constant. We are the variable. And variables, by definition, must adjust or be removed from the equation. The 14th day was coming, and with it, the moment when adaptation would stop being personal and start being permanent. The 14th day didn't bring news. It brought policy. That's how I knew this was no longer a story about Earth. It was a story about us. The announcement was brief, technical, and deliberately dull. A global coordination body, one most people had never heard of, released updated standards for time-dependent systems. Nothing dramatic, no speeches, just revised tolerances, expanded error margins, and a quiet recommendation that future infrastructure be designed under the assumption of persistent rotational variability. Persistent, not temporary, not provisional. I felt a slow chill reading that word, because persistence means you stop planning for a return. you plan for inheritance. By mid-morning, companies began responding before anyone told them to. Work hours softened at the edges. Markets extended buffers. Transport schedules gained elasticity. Not chaos, adaptation. Smooth, professional, efficient. Civilization doing what it does best when forced. Bending without admitting it's bending. And then, something unexpected happened. People started talking less. Not online. Those spaces never go quiet. But in real life, conversations shortened. Pauses grew longer. It was as if everyone felt the same subtle pressure and didn't quite know how to name it. I realized why while standing in line for coffee. For the first time in my life, no one complained about time. No long day. No not enough hours. No where did the time go? The old phrases didn't fit anymore. Time had stopped feeling like something we used and started feeling like something we were inside of. That afternoon, a final internal report crossed my screen. It wasn't marked urgent. It didn't need to be. The conclusion was understated to the point of cruelty. Future corrective intervention is neither feasible nor advisable. That was it. No villain, no solution, no reversal, just acceptance. I leaned back and closed my eyes, feeling the weight of that sentence settle in my chest. Not fear, not anger, finality. When I opened them again, I understood something that had been forming quietly for days. The danger wasn't that Earth had changed its rhythm. The danger was that we had built a world that only worked when the rhythm obeyed us. And now we were redesigning ourselves to fit something we could no longer command. That evening, I took one last long walk. Same route as before, same streets, same buildings. Everything looked unchanged. But the feeling was different, heavier, more deliberate. Every step felt counted. Every moment felt occupied. The sky darkened, and I noticed something strange, not in the stars, but in myself. I no longer expected the day to end at a precise moment. I just let it end when it did. Surrender disguised as maturity. Before sleep, I read a short note from a systems theorist I admire. It wasn't scientific. It was almost philosophical. Stable systems don't ask for loyalty, he wrote. They assume it. Unstable ones force you to choose. We had chosen, not consciously, not unanimously, but collectively. The 14th day ended smoothly, just like the others. Earth turned at its new pace, indifferent, resolved, complete in its motion. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something else to happen. I felt like it already had. Tomorrow wouldn't be about adaptation or acceptance anymore. Tomorrow would be about after, about the quiet realization that when the planet changes and survives, it's the civilizations built on old assumptions that must decide whether they will. The 15th day was coming, and it would not ask us what we remembered, only what we were willing to become. The 15th day felt lighter. That frightened me more than anything that came before. No tension in my chest when I woke up. No instinctive reach for alerts. No need to check graphs or messages before my feet hit the floor. The world had not returned to normal, but my mind had adjusted to the absence of it. That's how you know a transition is complete. Earth rotated again at its new pace. Clean, quiet, unarguable. No commentary followed the data this time. No one rushed to interpret it. The numbers were logged, archived, and treated the way constants used to be treated, as facts. I made coffee and watched the light spill through the window. Morning still felt like morning. Birds still argued over territory. Somewhere, A train passed on schedule, not because the planet obeyed it, but because the schedule had learned to bend. And suddenly, I understood the unexpected turn this story had taken. We survived, not heroically, not triumphantly, not even consciously. We survived by letting go of the idea that survival required control. For days we had feared consequences, system failures, cascading errors, biological collapse. And some costs did arrive. Quiet ones, sleepless nights, subtle fatigue, a lingering sense that something fundamental had shifted. But the world didn't end. It rearranged. The 15th day was the first time someone in authority said something honest without qualifiers. This is no longer an event. It's an era. No drama, no emphasis, just truth. An era defined not by catastrophe, but by humility. I went outside one last time and looked at the sky, expecting some final revelation. There was none. The universe offered no closing statement, no sign, no apology. The stars were distant and unmoved. The moon continued its slow dance, unconcerned with milliseconds or meanings. And that's when it hit me, the unexpected realization that reframed everything. Earth didn't break the universe. It reminded us of our place inside it. For centuries, we treated the planet as a backdrop, reliable, silent, obedient. A foundation so stable we forgot it was dynamic. We measured it, divided it, scheduled it, and assumed that because we understood it, it would always agree with us. But understanding is not ownership. The fastest day in Earth's history didn't announce the end of time. It exposed a deeper truth. Time was never ours to command. Stability was never guaranteed. And control was always a story we told ourselves to sleep at night. Now, the story had changed, not into one of fear, but into one of listening to systems larger than us, older than us, uninterested in our expectations. As night fell on the 15th day, slightly sooner than the world I grew up in would have predicted, I felt something I hadn't felt since this began, calm, not because everything was safe, but because everything was honest. Earth spins, life adapts. Civilizations either learn or fade. That's not a warning. It's not a threat. It's the rhythm of the universe. And tonight, for the first time since the planet sped up beneath our feet, we're not chasing the clock anymore. We're standing still long enough to notice that we were never outside the system at all. We were always inside it. And somehow, we still are.